Welcome back to the channel. This video is about the murder of George Cornell. George Cornell, born George Myers. He was born in Stepney in East London, but he moved to South London after meeting his wife-to-be Olive. So she was from South London, so he relocated himself from the East. He was quite a hard man by all accounts, a fighting man, not a man to be messed with. He's got quite a long criminal record. He was bits of violence and shop breaking, malicious wounding, things like that. He served quite a few prison sentences in his criminal career. George used to be on friendly terms with the twins. I'm not sure if he was an actual friend of theirs, but he was known to them as he was from the East End in Stepney, and I think he was well liked by the twins in the early days. Obviously, after relocating to South London, this was not a good thing, and the twins obviously didn't like that. There was rivalry, wasn't there, between people from the East and the South in criminal circles, so this would have been frowned upon by the twins. But I don't think there was any actual hatred there for George Cornell at this stage. I don't think him moving from East London to South London would have really bothered the twins that much. They might have called him a traitor and stuff like that. But then George does the unthinkable. He joins up with the Richardsons, and I think that's when the hatred for him would have really started, and especially in Ronnie Kray's mind. You know, well, Reggie wouldn't have liked it either, but I think with Ronnie, he would have maybe thought about it a lot and really brewed in his mind, and a real hatred developed, I think, from that stage with Ronnie and George Cornell. The hatred Ronnie had for the Richardsons, I think, stemmed from that they were just quite successful. They were getting quite a bit of money. Not to say that the Krays weren't getting a lot of money, because at that stage, early 60s, 63, they were doing quite well. They had a few clubs. They had Esmeralda's Barn. They had the Double R previously. They had the Kentucky. Different bits and pieces going on. So they weren't exactly broke, but the Richardsons were always making a bit more money. I think they were a bit more savvy, had a bit more up top, and like I said in another video, I think anyone getting a bit more money than Ronnie, I think that antagonized him. I think Reggie was the more money motivated of the two, but I think Ronnie was prone to be a bit jealous of people. I think if they were getting a few quid more than he is getting, you know, that's just my opinion. Yours might be different, but that's the way I see Ronnie coming across, you know. With George Cornell moving south, and then hooking up with the Richardsons, who were successful, I think from a very early stage, the hatred was there from Ronnie, and it was probably only a matter of time before he would want to really hurt George Cornell. At the time of his death, George was living at Masterman House in New Church Road, Camberwell, with his wife Olive and their two children. The flats here, as you can see, this is Masterman House. This type of housing is looked on in poor light now, but back in the 60s, this would have been quite luxurious. You know, people before these flats were built were living in terrible conditions in their houses, so this would have been like a good place to live back in the 60s. On the day of his death, he had been out drinking with Billy and Ron Webb in the Old Basin House pub on Kingsland Road, Haggerston. Billy and Ron Webb, as you know, were friendly with the Krays until the Battle of the Old Horns, which I covered in my last video. So George was out drinking with them most of the day. He returned home about 4:30 in the afternoon, and he stayed home until about 6:30. That evening, he had arranged to go and see a friend, Jimmy Andrews, with his friend Albie Woods. Jimmy Andrews was in the London hospital. He was recovering from a gunshot wound to the leg, so George had arranged with Albie Woods that they would go and visit Jimmy in the London hospital. After the visit, they decided to stop off at the Blind Beggar pub for a drink. This would have been about 8 o'clock. They spent about an hour with Jimmy Andrews at the London hospital, so they would have rolled up at the Blind Beggar about 8 o'clock and went in for a drink. About this time, Ronnie was drinking in a pub called The Lion in Tap Street. It was also called The Widows, that was its nickname that the firm gave it. It was run by a woman called Madge. Ronnie was there with some of the firm, Scotch Jack Dixon, Scotch Ian Barry, Reggie was there, Albert Donahue was there, and Ronnie got word that George Cornell was in the Blind Beggar. I think this might have come through a phone call or something, I'm not quite sure, but he got word that George Cornell was in the Blind Beggar. He then asked if anybody had a car there, and Scotch Jack Dixon said he did have a car, so I think that's when Ronnie made up his mind that he was going to go to the Blind Beggar. So Ronnie left the pub with Scotch Jack Dixon and Ian Barry also, and they got in the car and they headed towards the Blind Beggar. Ronnie, Scotch Jack Dixon and Ian Barry, they arrived at the Blind Beggar around about 8:35 p.m. Ronnie and Ian Barry walked into the saloon bar of the Blind Beggar, where Ronnie walked up to Cornell and he shot him. It's said that George Cornell said, "Look who's here and let's have a drink," but Ronnie Kray himself said in Broadmoor in an interview that it was all happened too quick for George to say anything. So we're not really going to know if George did or didn't. Ian Barry was also armed. He shot his gun into the ceiling. I don't know why he done this. Maybe he panicked. Maybe it was to put the frighteners on people. I think he was just shocked that he was roped into something like this, and it was definitely under duress, and I just think that he couldn't believe that he had got himself into this situation. Ronnie Kray and Ian Barry then left the Blind Beggar to the awaiting vehicle that was parked opposite the Blind Beggar with Scotch Jack Dixon in there waiting, and they made their way back to the Lion in Tap Street. The aftermath back at the Lion when Ronnie, Dixon and Barry got back was one of panic. Reggie was beside himself by all accounts. It just wasn't expected that Ronnie was going to go on a whim at 8:30 in the evening and shoot a man in a pub full of people. Various cars were available as the firm dispersed. They decided that they were going to head to Walthamstow. According to Albert Donahue, they stopped at the Stowe Club first, which was managed by firm member Limehouse Willie, and then they moved on to Checkers as a temporary bolt hole. Checkers was at 145 the High Street in Walthamstow. It was owned by a policeman friend of the twins called Charlie Hobbs. They had been drinking there a couple of years previously on and off, and they had a private bar there for use for the firm. Three brothers by the name of Till had been telephoned by Reggie while Ron was away at the Blind Beggar. They were in tow along with other members of the firm, but we will deal with the Tills later. I've got a little bit to say on them. At Checkers, Ronnie changed his clothes and he seemed quite calm about the situation. Reggie wasn't so calm. He was saying to Ronnie that he should have organised things better. A radio was brought in and the firm gathered around that to listen to updates, and the first update they got was just that a man had been shot in Whitechapel and a roadblock had been set up. The next update they had was at midnight, and it said that the man who was shot had died. George Cornell, he didn't die straight away. He was transferred to Maida Vale Hospital later in that evening, and they couldn't stem the blood loss because it was coming from within the skull, so it couldn't be stopped by pressure alone. He was put on an operating table, but unfortunately for George, he had a heart attack. They gave him a heart massage, but it didn't help, and at 10:29 that evening, George was declared dead at the moment of the heart attack, and that was the end of George. The next port of call for the twins and the firm was 51 Moresby Road. It was a flat owned by David Till. He was one of the Till brothers that I mentioned. There was David, Alfie and Bobby. They met the twins, I'm not sure, a few years earlier through the brother Alfie when he visited one of the twins' clubs with Mad Teddy Smith. So they went to David's flat. They were there for 2 weeks with members of the firm were there, Ronnie, Reggie were there, the Till brothers. There was quite a few people there. I think they said there was 12 people in the flat, along with David Till's wife Christine and young children. I don't know how many children they had. There was all sorts of accusations by Bobby Till, because he later gave evidence in the Kray's trial. He said that Ronnie was wanting to lie down with his 11-year-old brother Paul. He said that he was making a death list in a children's colouring book. A few things really. As I said, they were there for 2 weeks, and some of the things Bobby Till is saying in his book, I don't know if you've read it, but they definitely did stay at Moresby Road, and they were there for 2 weeks, and it would have been a strain on the family. I think David Till said to Ronnie Kray, please don't come to the flat, I've got my wife and child there, you can't do this, but Ronnie done it anyway. But some of the things in that Till's book is you have to take with a pinch of salt. These are men that did give evidence against the twins. Bobby Till said that Charlie Kray was a rapist. Now I don't know Charlie Kray, or didn't know Charlie Kray, but he doesn't come across as a rapist. I'm not sure why Bobby Till would say that, but he said that Ronnie Kray raped him. Make of that what you will. Who knows? I don't know. There's no doubt that the Tills were heavily involved with the twins. I don't know what role they played in the firm. They say in their book that they weren't really a member of the firm, they were more friends of the twins. Maybe they were doing a bit of driving, carrying a gun. They don't seem like violent men to me at all. They don't seem like men of violence. I suppose some of the blame has to lie at the twins' feet for picking David Till's flat. It was a bit of an error of judgment. It gave Bobby Till the excuse he needed to make contact with the police, which he did while they were at Moresby Road. Bobby Till did give evidence at the trial at the Old Bailey, but his evidence wasn't really used. I don't think even the people in the court really believed what this man was saying. But I suppose Bobby Till going to the police did give the police a leg up to get the ball rolling on a new investigation, and that did eventually end with the twins spending most of their lives in prison. After 2 weeks, the twins and the firm left Moresby Road. They had a brief stint in Tangiers with Billy Hill, but then they were had to come back from there. I think they were kicked out of Tangiers. I'm not quite sure if that was that time when they went to Tangiers or not. You'll have to, I'm not sure, but I think they did get kicked out. Then they eventually were arrested in a flat at 471 Leabridge Road in the summer of '66. They had an identification parade, but Ronnie Kray and Ian Barry failed to be picked out. That pretty much wrapped up the Cornell murder for a good while. For just over 2 years, Ronnie Kray did get away with murder in a pub at 8:30 in the evening, full of witnesses. Before I end the video, I want to look at the reasons why Ronnie Kray would have shot George Cornell. There's a few going around. Some could be true, others might not be. I'll start with one that I do believe is true happened, and that was a feud with a man named Mickey Morris. Mickey Morris was a friend of the twins, possibly a member of the firm. He was a young boxer, or used to be a boxer. Ronnie Kray took Mickey Morris to Newcastle when the twins went up there. They went up there, I can't remember what year it would have been, but George Cornell apparently told Mickey Morris's mum, May, that Ronnie had only took Mickey to Newcastle because he wanted to get him into bed, and he said, you know, he's a big fat puff. This got back to Ronnie, and Ronnie was not happy with it. Apparently he had words with George about it, but then George just ignored Ronnie and started carrying on telling people. Now, The encounter that when Ronnie spoke to George, that could have been in the Astor possibly, because there was people said that they did come together at the Astor, so maybe that was when they did come together, with Ronnie saying to George, look, don't be saying those things. But then George just ignored what Ronnie said and carried on telling people that he was a big fat puff. Another reason why Ronnie might have shot George Cornell is one that I don't really believe, I don't think, and that's that George gave Ronnie a beating. Lenny Hamilton and Billy Webb have said this, but both men do have an axe to grind with Ronnie, so they might have just been saying it. And they were both harmed by Ronnie with a bit of violence, Lenny being burnt and Billy Webb obviously getting a kicking in the old horns. But the theory was repeated by Wilf Pine, and Wilf Pine knew Ronnie in his later years when Ron was in Broadmoor, and Wilf Pine don't really have no reason to lie about it, so while I don't really believe it, you never know. Another reason why Ronnie might have shot George would be the Mr. Smiths the night before, where a friend of the firm, Dickie Hart, was killed. This, I think, could be a possible reason in Ronnie's mind. He felt the need to avenge the death of Dickie Hart. I'm not sure how close Dickie Hart was to the twins. I know he was friends with them. I don't think he was a member of the firm. Another one that I don't believe was that George Cornell issued threats against Ronnie, possibly to kill him. I don't think that George issued threats to kill Ron. Ron made it sound like George did threaten to kill him. Maybe George might have threatened to give Ron a kicking or something like that, but I don't think George Cornell would threaten to kill Ronnie Kray. I don't know if there was any reason for George to want to do that at that point. Plus, no one really mentions that apart from Ron, about George Cornell being a threat to Ron's life. But Ron said that that's what he heard and he wanted to get in first and kill him. My opinion on these theories, I think Mickey Morris, I think it's a combination of a few of them that mounted up in Ronnie's mind, and he just snapped that evening while he was sat in the Lion. Maybe he didn't take his medication, I don't know. But I think the Mickey Morris fat puff comments made by George, I think that's true. I believe this. I don't believe George Cornell called Ronnie a fat puff to his face, but I believe he was saying it to other people, so this antagonised Ron. Some of it was also the Dickie Hart thing the night before. See, it all adds up. Then you add the fact that George left the East End and joined the Richardson gang, so I think all these things added up in Ronnie's mind that evening, and he just went and killed him. That's what happened. I know there's another theory given by Mickey Fawcett in his book involving Nobby Clark, but I can't quite remember what that one was. I've not got the book anymore, so I can't really comment on that. That's about that for this video. I'd like to thank you all for watching it. I know the quality isn't that great and my mic's not that great, but I hope it doesn't detract from the video and you still enjoyed it. Yeah, that's about it, and I will catch you again in the next one. Thank you.